We're delighted to have Dr. David Agus joining us today. He's a professor of medicine and engineering at USC and heads up the West Side Cancer Center and the Center for Applied Molecular Medicine there at USC. He clearly excels in business as much as he does in academics. He's the co-founder of two personalized medicine companies. One is Navigenics and the other is Applied Proteomics. His recently published book, The End of Illness, calls for a shift in the fundamental ways in which we think about the actions of health and illness, including a view of the body as a complex system rather than a series of simple causal chains. He balances this philosophical approach with a very practical one, laying out recommended annual health checkpoints, lab results that you should have done regularly, and why you should not sit down all day at your job. His book is really, for me, was all about prevention and how to keep yourself healthy, which is an area that both Google and Googlers need to own as we grow older. And if all of that somehow left you in doubt about his brilliance, Dr. Agus also has achieved a degree of celebrity stardom. He was on The Daily Show a few weeks ago and with Jon Stewart. And I guess what we really are all wondering is what Jon Stewart says to his guests as he leans over the desk as the camera pans out. So with that, I welcome Dr. David Agus.
Thank you. It's funny, Jon Stewart, before the show I went up to him and I said, I'm scared to death. I'm a cancer doc. I do all this media, but being live with a comic scares me a little. And he said, listen, I'll give you a hint. Most people at the end of the show stand up and leave, but there's 30 seconds when the credits roll. You lean forward and talk to me, people will think we're friends and it will work. And then I lean forward at the end, he goes, the deal was for me to have told you this is now you have to be my doctor. So it's a pleasure to be here and thank you. The End of Illness is a declaratory aggressive title. I submitted it to the publisher about 8-9 months ago, and it was called at the time, What is Health? As an homage to Schrodinger's What of Life book from the 1940s. And I got a call from the publisher saying, Agus, Steve Jobs just called and changed the title of your book. I'm like, he did? And he changed it to The End of Illness. I called Steve and I said, Steve, I love the title, but why didn't you tell me or discuss it with me? He goes, Agus, it's not your job, it's theirs. And I was like, okay. And I thought about it, and it is obviously an aggressive title, but it's something I believe in. And I truly believe we can delay illness to the 9th or 10th decade. And if you look in the United States, 1956 was the last year you can die of old age on a death certificate. And since then, we've had to have a cause, whether it be diabetes or lung cancer or prostate cancer, you name it, there had to be a cause. But I want to go back to the era of dying of old age. And the paradox is, in that if we delay illness to the 9th or 10th decade, healthcare costs will come down dramatically. If you get ill in your 80s, 90s, or 100, you don't go into an intensive care unit, you don't go on a ventilator. We treat you with dignity instead of trying to prolong things. Remember, over 60% of healthcare costs in the United States right now are the last 2 years of life. We spend almost nothing from age 15 till age 55. And obviously, part of the premise that I want to push to you is we got to shift that because we have to prevent illness. We are the #1 spender in the world on healthcare, and we'll rank 32nd. So Washington has X bandwidth for health, and most of it, if not all of it, is spent on healthcare finance. None of it is spent on health. And so what I'm going to present you today is a new way of looking at health and really focusing on what I think we need to do as changes. The book came out 3-4 weeks ago. And what's amazing is I've already had about 6 now video conferences with members of the Chinese government, and they're going to enact parts of the book as law this summer. Whereas the US government, it'll take a decade of debate before they even bring it up to talk about it publicly. So the first question when I talk about this book is everyone says, you're a cancer doctor. Why are you have the right to publish this book and talk about it? And so to me, it comes from the old adage that in order to understand peace, you have to go to war. So fighting cancer for the last 25 years has brought, in my mind, a whole new way of approaching health. And the team that I work with are 2 other individuals who bring very unique ways of looking at health. A guy named Murray Gell-Mann. Murray is probably the greatest living physicist, discovered the quark, string theory. He won the Nobel Prize in 1969, and now he's working on modeling health with our team. And a guy named Danny Hillis, who built the first supercomputer and discovered RAID storage in the old days, and is again one of the great engineers who is now working on modeling health now. And so what you'll see is the result of us thinking about health and approaching it as a biologist, a physicist, and engineer. And I'll show you a new model looking at health as a complex emergent system, as disease in the body, how one can apply it, so we'll be prescriptive, and then how technology is going to be, in my mind, what allows us and brings us the hope to actually bring us change. So the first question is, what is health? Is it your cholesterol? Is it your weight? Is it how you feel? Is it how you sleep? Is it how you look? How do you define health? So any engineer will tell you, it's impossible to optimize a system unless you develop parameters on which to optimize. So what is it? Is it how long you live? Is it what you look like? What parameter are we going to optimize health? We don't have a blood test for health. So if I ask you today, are you healthy? How do you respond? And that's one of the fundamental problems is I don't know how to define health when I look at it. And so we can talk about all the corporate wellness programs in the world, but corporate wellness programs will optimize on lowering, health insurance costs. Corporate illness programs will have delaying illness till retirement. But I want to figure out a way to optimize health. And we'll talk about ways I think we could start to do that going forward. So Mark Twain, in his eminent wisdom, said the only way to keep your health is to eat what you don't want, drink what you don't like, and do what you'd rather not. When I asked Steve, why didn't you like the title, What is Health? He said, if you put the word health in the title, people think of chewing cardboard. And that's part of the problem, is that health is something that we know we're not going to like if you say what you have to do. Things that are unhealthy are more appealing. And what I'll try to show you today is that that's not really the case. By definition, things in health don't have to be unappealing. And so, again, we go to what is that metric for health? Well, in the United States, we spent over $1 billion last year in people over the age of 50 getting growth hormone. Why? If I give you growth hormone at age 50, 60, or 70, you're going to look better in a couple of months. You're going to be all buff. Your friends are going to come up and say, hey, what happened to you? Did you get a haircut? You look great. You're going to feel better. You're going to live on average 12 to 13 years less. But you're going to look better. And yet our country, we do this all the time, right? People go in, especially in my city, Los Angeles, and they get shots of growth hormone to look better. They take, whether it be steroids, they get Botox, they get all kinds of things to look better. But again, I want people to think about tomorrow as well as today. There's an amazing group of people in Ecuador that was identified in a paper in Science this last year where they actually looked, and they have a mutation in the growth hormone receptor. And these people don't get cancer and don't get diabetes at all in their populations. They have other problems, but what we also know is that species that grow larger, or members of a species that grow larger, have more health problems. And yet, we as a society push to making people larger. One of the chapters in the book is about football players. Football players are, in general, very large, have a lot of inflammation, as we'll talk about. And CNN did a story on this, for the Super Bowl. And I can't tell you how many hate emails I got and letters. You're, taking away American culture. You're screwing up. I'm not against football, but I'm against the concept of inflammation. I'm against the concept of the bigger, the better, and as we'll talk about. And so we need to start to identify what are the metrics each of us individually are going to look at, because obviously we want to live until our 90s. So the key is avoid disease. I look at 2 or 3 people a week and I say, I've got no more drugs to treat your cancer. I've run out. And unfortunately, the cancer is going to win, and I don't want to do that anymore. And the way to stop that is to avoid disease. And most diseases can be delayed or avoided. I don't know if you guys saw the paper last week, but we now will make Alzheimer's a disease of the past over the next 5 to 7 years. It's astonishing. But Alzheimer's will go away. And if you look at it, a month ago, 15% of us in the room will be affected by Alzheimer's. And as of the data last week, it's staggering. There are 2 big advances. The first is they took a couple of cells that made this abnormal protein called tau, which is what messes up the brain in Alzheimer's, and they put them in the brain of a mouse. And then they sacrificed the mouse a couple of weeks later, and what do you know? Those tangles are all over the brain. So Alzheimer's isn't a disease of the brain. It's a disease of a couple cells that then spreads its proteins throughout the brain. So if you block that, you no longer will have Alzheimer's. And we have a mouse model now that's accurate, and we can develop it instead of testing in humans. The problem in testing in patients is you got to do it for 10 years, and you're not going to know until 10 years later whether it worked or not. So now we've got a model. And then, get a load of this, they took a drug for lymphoma that had been FDA approved already, is on the market, and they gave it to these mice. Well, if a mouse, you drop a napkin in a cage, they chew it up and make a little nest. It's called nesting. You give a mouse Alzheimer's, they just sit in a corner and act like this and do nothing. You give them this drug for lymphoma with the Alzheimer's, 2 days later, they're making a nest again. You look in the brain of the animals, 60% of these tangles are gone. And again, this is a drug that's already FDA approved and on the market. So we're going to have a marked impact on Alzheimer's and every disease we'll talk about today. The key is delaying them and preventing them so you, I, our loved ones can benefit from those advances. And again, we talked about that it's actually going to lower costs if we do this right. So in the 1930s, J.B.S. Haldane, who was the great thinker of the time, said this amazing quote, because it really is true today, and he was right, and he predicted it 90 years ago. He said, bacteria and this germ theory is going to screw up everything because we're going to forget about the system. We're going to treat other diseases like cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's, like infectious disease, and we're going to be wrong. And he was right. Remember, infectious disease, you make the diagnosis, you know the treatment. It's easy. That bacteria, that antibiotic, they work. It doesn't care if you're short, round, tall, fat, green, yellow, blue, it will work, right? Because bacteria come from without. The problem is human disease comes from within. Human disease, you make a diagnosis, most of the time you don't know the treatment because it's the interaction of that disease in your body that's unique in each of us. Very different from infectious disease. Yet, over the last 90 years, we've been treating almost all disease like infectious disease. You have X, let me give you Y. And most of the time, unfortunately, that doesn't work. And so this is one of the sad figures that's in the book that I get a lot of comments about, which is heart disease, stroke, down dramatically in death rate over the last 50 years. Cancer, not really a change. Well, what caused this major decline? Two things. Smoking, right? We're smoking less. And then statins. So statins are a class of drug that were developed to lower LDL, the bad cholesterol, and then they were given to patients. And they had a dramatic effect in heart disease and stroke. Turns out that their mechanism, how they work, was different than lowering cholesterol, as we'll talk about. It's because they're one of the great anti-inflammatory drugs we have. And so the root of diseases like heart disease and cancer are inflammation. So in fact, statins will reduce the incidence of cancer beautifully if one takes them for several years. And so dramatic effect here, yet influenza, right? We can give vaccines, we have antibiotics, fantastic. Cancer, not really a big impact. And so cancer we've treated in a reductionist way. You know, the amazing thing about cancer that people don't get is, you know, again, I was one of the heads of the Cancer Genome Project, so I'm as guilty as anybody else. But if you look at breast cancer under a microscope, a pathologist will look and say, hey, it's breast cancer. They don't care what the genetics are. The body doesn't care what the genetics are. Breast cancer looks like breast cancer. Colon cancer looks like colon cancer. So evolution is selecting out for phenotype, what it looks like, not the underlying genetics. There are 150 ways to get to be a breast cancer, yet they all look alike. Yet our treatments, we keep trying to hit those molecular abnormalities. We forget the other part. So a clinical trial was done about 10 years ago that people thought was crazy, that now is the standard of care in the treatment of a disease, breast cancer. And what we did was we took women after optimal treatment, and half got placebo, and half got a drug that builds bone, a drug for osteoporosis. Recurrence was reduced by 40%. Why? Breast cancer metastasizes to bone. If you change the soil, the seed doesn't grow. And so we just made the body inhospitable to breast cancer, and what do you know? It didn't come back in those women. Powerful statement and powerful way to treat disease. Because to me, diseases like cancer, Alzheimer's, heart disease, they are verbs, not noun. You're cancering. You're heart diseasing. And I want to change you from that disease state to a health state. And it's a different way of approaching disease if you think about it. And so the way I look at it is a complex emergent system where you've got inputs, right? Your input is your DNA. Your input's what you eat. It's your environment. It's your work environment. It's your friends. Those are all your inputs. And your output is how you feel. But that middle state function has been historically hidden, and we haven't been able to look at it. Historically, we give change in input, and we see how it affects the output with all those inputs, but we've never been able to look in the middle. Well, on the cover of the book, let me just borrow this for one sec, we can all of a sudden see the state function. And this is a picture of the human proteome. It's a drop of blood, going through a superconducting magnet, where we get a 50 to 60 gigabyte image of all the proteins in the blood. That's that state function for the first time we can see, and we'll talk about that a little more in a minute. But all of a sudden, you've got various state functions that are equivalent classes of history. So they are patients with heart disease, patients with cancer, and we can start to modulate them. For the first time now with technology, we can actually see them. Well, the bad news is, it is almost impossible to understand complex emergent systems. The good news is you can control systems you can't understand. If I ask my 11-year-old boy, how do you stop a train? He just says, you pull the brake. He doesn't first say, what's the weight of the train? What's the track made of? What's the temperature? What's the airspeed? He just says, listen, I got to figure out a way to control it. My field has spent the last 50 years trying to understand diseases like cancer, rather than just working on ways to optimize and control them. The average cancer on diagnosis has how many mutations? 130. So if I can pick one that I could target at a drug, you really think it's going to make a major difference? Remember, my field, cancer, we try to shrink the disease by 50%. That's called a win, and that's what you get FDA approval on. Well, 50% isn't even an order of magnitude when you're talking hundreds of billions of cells. So there's something missing here in what we're doing. There's something missing in how we're approaching these. You know, in 1997, I was a trainee at Sloan Kettering. And a kid, 25-year-old kid, had germ cell tumor in the brain, the lung, and the liver, and he went to the best hospitals in the country. And they told him, listen, chemotherapy is just going to make you sick. Why don't you go home to Texas and spend your last couple months with your family? Instead, this kid went to Indianapolis. And he went there because some goofball doc, and I say the word goofball affectionately, he took 2 platinum electrodes and put it in a gel and said, do cancer cells like electricity or not? Well, it turns out they didn't really care about the electricity, but some of the platinum in those rods killed some of the cells. So they gave it, this is the same thing in my wedding band, they gave it intravenously to this kid in Indianapolis. A year and a half later, he won his first of 7 Tours de France. And so why did platinum cure Lance Armstrong? I have no freaking idea. Yet you can find 50 explanations in the scientific literature. Well, it affects the DNA adducts and here and here. Again, we don't really know how these drugs work. Most chemotherapy, I'll challenge you, I don't think chemotherapy has any data that it actually touches a cancer cell. It works, believe me, but it probably changes your system so the cancer doesn't want to grow anymore. We don't have data that actually targets and hits the dividing cancer cells. Cancer cells are very similar to normal cells. And so again, when you think of this complex emergent system, we have to look at different ways of measuring the system, looking at perturbations when we look at disease. So remember, I'm the same field that put out ads like this. I'm the same field that put out ads like this, and this, and this. And can't forget the dentists. You know, I'm the same field that 25, 30 years ago said, take margarine, not butter. And we killed millions of people by telling them to do that. So over and over again, we make these declaratory statements without any real data, right? We make these observational findings. There's an association of X with Y, and therefore we should avoid X. And so one of the things I'll talk to you about in a minute is vitamins, again, which gets people really upset. Because many people, vitamins have been a crutch on which they're leaning on for the last several decades. And I'm taking away that crutch. So they get really upset. You know, I spoke at the Commonwealth Club last night, and I had protesters. I've never had a protester before. It's true, I'm different than most people in that the protesters were 85 years old. So it's a very different kind of protester who protests what I have to say. But you know, look at things like vitamin D, as we'll talk about. Right now, if you're over the age of 50, 60% of people are taking vitamin D supplementation. The government in Canada had to outlaw vitamin D testing because it was 11% of their healthcare budget 2 years ago. Why are people testing for vitamin D? Because there are associations. People with lower vitamin D have a slightly higher cancer rate and a slightly higher heart disease rate. Also, if you smoke, you have lower vitamin D. If you're obese, you have lower vitamin D. Nobody's saying if you give vitamin D, you're going to stop smoking, but there's that association too. And we'll talk about some of the data because it really is leading us astray in many of the things we do. One of the great examples is exercise. And so our exercise notion in our country is you do an hour of exercise at the gym or the DVD you put in your machine and watch and do some yoga for an hour, and then you sit at your desk the rest of the day. Well, if you start to look at the data in real studies, and we'll talk about some of them as old as 60 years old, The data show that that hour of exercise a day is awesome. You sit the rest of the day, you negate it all, and it causes harm. In fact, that harm, if one does a quantitation on incidence of heart disease, it's worse than smoking, if you look at it. And so the key is moving. And so the original study done is the coolest study. It was published in 1953 in the British medical journal Lancet, and nobody paid attention to it. It wasn't referenced for literally 40 or 50 years. And they did something with privacy rules now nobody can do, is that this guy, Jeremiah Morris, went and he looked at the 26,000 workers in the British Transit Authority. And he just looked at all their data. I mean, he didn't care who they were, he just looked at their data. And what he said is that there were two classes of employees. There were the bus drivers that sat 90% and drove the buses, and then there were the ticket takers that walked around and took the tickets from those double-decker buses. Well, the heart disease deaths was 60% less in the ticket takers compared to the bus drivers, even though they weighed the same, they ate the same, they lived in the same neighborhoods, and everything the same. The difference was one group sat and one group walked. Powerful argument. Well, he went further in that paper. This is one of the coolest graphs in science, is it looks at death rate as associated with profession. And what it showed is the worst professions were hairdressers who stood in one place, were the typists who sat in one place. The best professions, believe it or not, were the coal miners and the gardeners, because they moved and they walked. Today, Nike is launching a product that's called Fuel, which is a band which you wear, and it looks at how much you move during the day. It communicates by Bluetooth, and it creates these communities, because unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, we all need competition to do the right thing. And it's going to create competition among friends, among corporations, employees, to start to move more during the day and quantitate it. Moving equates to better health. So I wore one of those accelerometers, and I realized I was sitting most of the day. And I got one of those phones that made me look like an air traffic controller. So now when I'm in my office, I'm walking, talking on the phone. I reduced by half the amount of time I sit. Someone comes to meet you during the day, say, let's go for a walk. That's a sign of respect, rather than just sitting in a conference room and talking. And I know it's a difference in corporate culture, but over time will make an enormous difference on health. Obviously I talk a lot on negative stuff and what we're doing wrong, but obviously we're doing things right. If you look in the United States between 1900 and 2008, there's a dramatic increase in how long we live. True, much of that increase comes from reducing infant mortality, right? Because these data can be somewhat misleading, right? If infants live, past the age of 5, the chances are they're going to live till their, 60s. That obviously skews the results to the right. And especially worldwide now, where we're starting to eliminate much of infant mortality. But at the same time, we are living longer, so we are doing some things right. The problem, and the fundamental problem, is that evolution selects out for who has good kids. It doesn't select out for who lives until their 90s. And we forget that sometimes. So in order to go to your 90s, you got to optimize a little and tweak, because evolution didn't take care of us. And there are things that can help you during childbearing years that may hurt you later on. So for example, if you skip your flu shot this year, which I'm sure none of you did, if you skip your flu shot and you got the flu, you would all survive, I guarantee you. You'd have 5, 6, 7 days of feeling poor, et cetera, then you go back to work and you'd be fine. A decade from now, your risk of heart disease and cancer are 10 and 12% elevated. Because those 5 to 7 days of marked inflammation will have its manifestation a decade from now. Our culture is all about what will affect us today, not tomorrow. We have to think more long-term, as I'll show you. So US mortality, and this is unfortunately the data is several years lagging always. If you look at it, a quarter of deaths are heart disease, right? Men higher than women, so 40% of us will die of heart disease, about 20% of them, women, will die of heart disease. Cancer, stroke, infections, most of these things are delayable or preventable by current technologies. Yet most of the things we'll talk about, we ain't really doing, and I'm not sure why. So one of the technologies, and full disclosure, I'm a co-founder of Navigenics, so one of the DNA companies out there, and you guys are an investor. Google was an original investor in Navigenics. I did it because the government had been spending close to $1 billion a year looking at gene associations with disease, and yet nobody was using the data or benefiting from it. So 1974, Monsanto annual report, they said $150 million to sequence one gene. 2 weeks ago on Nightline, Bill Weir, the Nightline anchor, came to my office, and this was live on Nightline. We sequenced his genes, and we showed he was higher risk of heart disease. So based on that, we did a heart scan live on TV, and he's a 42-year-old fit guy, kids under the age of 6, traveling all over the world. He's now in, just did a report yesterday on, the Foxconn workers for Apple and all the issues. He's traveling all over. And we showed live on TV that in his heart artery, the big artery, the LED going to his heart, there's a big lesion there. He would have had a heart attack in the next 1, 2, or 5 years, but we identified this live on TV, and he's going to be on preventive strategies, and it saved his life. The next day, the American Heart Association, in their beautiful wisdom, says, Agus screwed up. He wasn't eligible for screening. I'm like, are you guys serious? Either your criteria are wrong, because he was positive, something's missing in this picture here. So then they said, well, you're right, maybe the criteria can be changed a little, but technology's bad in screening, and there are problems with it. I go, then you guys should be saying, why aren't we putting more resources to technology to do better screening? Just blanket saying he shouldn't have been screened because too many people will be screened, that's the wrong thing. And so it really scares me in that regard. And so many of you have already done this, but these is me. I mean, these are my DNA results. Did it overnight tell me exactly what was going on? No, but it was somewhat of a religious moment for me, because all of a sudden I looked and I knew more about me. I realized I had a 42% chance of having a heart attack, and I had a normal cholesterol. And so, based on that, I went on a statin, and we'll talk about that data in a minute. I'm on an aspirin, I'm lean body mass, I exercise. I actually changed behaviors. I eat better when I saw myself on a piece of paper. We always kind of view ourselves different than we really are. And it changed me. But it's not all in your genes, right? And this is a chart where the black is the genes, the white is environment. Almost every disease, there's an environmental part that we can control, and there's the genetic part that we can blame our parents for. Although we like to blame our parents for everything, none of these diseases are deterministic. They don't just happen, right? We can prevent them, whether it be by behavior, changing environment, or actually drugs. All of them can help. And when we talk about drugs, we'll talk more about statins, but I get vilified saying I'm a shill for the pharmaceutical company. Agus is out there pushing drugs. He works for them. He doesn't want to push the natural things because then he'll be out of business in treating disease. The drugs I push, how much a statin costs? Without health insurance, you can go to Walmart and get a 90-day supply for $9. So these are generics, these are available, and these will radically change healthcare when we start to look at the data. So aspirin, an aspirin a day, $3 a year to take a baby aspirin, 81 milligrams a year. And if you start to look at the data, after 5 years of aspirin, death due to GI cancer down 54%. One case of colon cancer to a company like Google costs $247,000. So again, if you can reduce that by half by saying take an aspirin, I don't get why people aren't doing it more. After 20 years, death. I mean, death is a bad side effect. Death due to prostate cancer down 10%, lung cancer 30%, colorectal cancer 40%, esophageal cancer 60%. You start to look at this data and you start to say, listen, I'm not saying anybody should take a pill, but I'm saying that conversation with your physician needs to happen. And you need to say, because there are reasons why you shouldn't be on it, but you need to have the conversation and say, listen, I understand there's data that this may benefit me. What are the downsides? And talk about me as an individual, given my family history, given my genetics, given my risk factors. I want to know why I'm not on something like this. And if you're a company and you say to your employees, listen, you can do whatever you want, but if you have that discussion with your doctor, I'm going to give you a discount on your health insurance because it's going to benefit us. Michael Dell, was a hero to me in that he said, listen, I have 105,000 or so employees at Dell, and they're welcome to smoke. But if they smoke, they're going to have a different health insurance cost than the non-smokers. Because why should smokers be subsidized by the non-smokers? And that data are profound. And we need to push and change. And obviously it's aggressive. People will get upset. But we're the #1 spender in healthcare in the world, and our results are dismal. 16.5% of GDP and growing every year. Unless we start to enact things and change and prevent, it ain't going to get smaller. You start to look at drugs like statins. And again, these are prescription drugs now, although about 6 months ago they were filed to go over the counter. They are generic. And again, they are inexpensive, costing about $36 for an entire year of treatment. And you start to look at the data. And the Jupiter study, which was really a pivotal study because it took people with normal cholesterol. So a normal cholesterol, not a high cholesterol, a normal cholesterol, and they put them on a pill a day. And what it did was it delayed heart attack and stroke by over a decade. And many cancers reduced their incidence by double-digit percentages. Yes, 1% of people or less will have some side effects. 100% reversible. If you have it, you stop. But again, if we can have this dramatic effect on disease, why aren't we using it more if the cost is so low? So again, I'm not getting why we're not doing that. And yet we do the other side, which is we take pills, which end up costing more than these pills I just talked about. 39,000 women tracked over 19 years. And you can criticize all the study all you want, but they looked at women who took vitamins, vitamin B6, folic acid, and then copper and iron, versus women who didn't. And actually the women who took the vitamins were healthier at baseline. They were skinnier, they had less diabetes, and they looked at them and said, what's the difference in the outcome? Well, a 15% higher death rate in the women who took the supplements. 15% higher death rate in the women who took the supplements. So I look at that and I say, by the year 2004, 65% of women in this country were taking supplements. And I say, well, there's got to be some data behind it, or why would all those women be doing it? Why would it be multi-billion-dollar industry if there weren't some benefit there to it? Then I look at the internet, and this is just in the last couple months. These are all the headlines about vitamin D. According to this, it can cure every disease known to mankind. And I mean, that's great. So then I kind of look and say, there's got to be data here, right? There's got to be data why this happens. In the United States now, over 75% of us are, quote, low in vitamin D. There's data that there's an epidemic of low vitamin D over the last decade. As we spend more time indoors, wear sunscreen, vitamin D levels are coming down. Yet hip fracture rates are also down over that same period. So it starts to make you wonder, why is that really the case? And what is normal? Who defined what a normal value is? When I was born, I didn't come with an ingredient manual that says your normal value of vitamin D should be X. Because remember, vitamin D is a network, not an individual node. There's vitamin D, there's the receptor, and then there's 6 signaling molecules. All we're measuring is one part of a network. So if you have low vitamin D, it probably means you've got a high binding receptor, or you've got an elevated number of receptors, or one of those signaling molecules is a little bit higher than somebody else. Yet we look at this and we all start saying, hey, we're low in vitamin D, we got to correct that. But part of it comes from the notion that if you go to your doctor and he or she draws arbitrary lab values, because unfortunately most of them are somewhat arbitrary, and they say, come back in a year, you say, listen, I shouldn't have gone. There was no value from going to my doctor. That wellness visit, he didn't tell me to do anything, or she didn't say anything different. They say, well, vitamin D is low, take vitamin D. You perceive value. That physician perceives they gave you value. That perception is key. About 2.5 years ago, the World Health Organization came out with a blanket statement saying, cell phones may cause brain cancer. And there was a panic around the world. And if you start to look at what is the root data they went on, what they did was they looked at 26,000 people with brain cancers. And they asked the brain cancer patient and the spouse, how much did you use the cell phone? And when they answered, it was almost 2.5 times more in the brain cancer patient than the spouse. So spouses are good control. Pretty similar genetics, same environment, eat the same, live the same, and 2.5-fold more cell phone usage. So clearly there may be an association. So a clever group went and said, let's audit the cell phone records because we can do that. And they went back and they were exactly the same. Because human perception is we got to blame something, right? I have brain cancer, I must have done something wrong. Well, the cell phone, that's why I talked on the cell phone. So they perceive they did it differently. You went to breast cancer patients, in 2,000 breast cancer patients, you said, what was your diet before and after you were diagnosed with breast cancer? Uniformly, the women said, my diet was horrible, I had breast cancer, I saw the light, now I'm healthy. When they went back and audited what they ate, it was exactly the same. So again, human nature is we got to blame something. There's something, when something bad happens, something wrong. Something happens to my child, it must be that vaccine they got because there's got to be a reason for it. Or if I have this problem, it's got to be because something I did or something in the environment, et cetera. We all want to blame something. But let's go back and look at the data on vitamin D. So they took women 70 years and older, over 2,000 of them, and they gave them a very high dose of vitamin D that raised their serum vitamin D level for a year. And 26% higher fracture rate, not lower, higher fracture rate. So all of a sudden, I mean, women are taking vitamin D to increase their bone density and prevent fractures. And yet this is a very well-respected journal with a couple thousand patients showing an increase in bone fracture rate. Remember, the body's homeostatic. You take a bolus of something, you downregulate the receptors, and you screw up the signaling. What's the only reason we tan? To block vitamin D absorption. So right there, evolution has a very difficult way. It requires a lot of energy that we evolved so we don't have too much vitamin D. Yet we take these big boluses of pills all the time. So then, well, maybe the dose was too high. So they did a study in women where they took women who, in the Nurses' Health Study, so again, over 20,000 women were looked at, and they gave them vitamin D and calcium, so the regular vitamin D and calcium that most people take, you know, the Ascal-D or whatever brand it is. And in that study, there was no effect on bone fracture by taking calcium and vitamin D. And there were side effects that caused kidney stones, that affected gastric upset, all of those things, yet no benefit. And most women over the age of 60 take calcium and vitamin D. So the first question to ask your doctor if they say you should be on calcium and vitamin D is why? Osteoporosis, we know, is a genetic disorder. Taking calcium and vitamin D doesn't make it better, yet we do it. So again, something a little screwy there in my mind. And then this study, this was a $240 million study, almost $250 million spent by the US government. Vitamin E. We know vitamin E is a great antioxidant. Everybody's taking it to prevent prostate cancer. Let's see how much it prevents prostate cancer. So they gave men 400 units. This is the same amount in a multivitamin. They gave them that. After 3 years, they halted the study, $250 million study. Why? Because there was a 17% higher incidence of prostate cancer in the men who took vitamin E. That lasted for 3-4 years after stopping the vitamin. A 17% increase in the most common non-skin cancer in men. First of all, the impact on the individual is staggering. The impact on society, on companies, on our health insurance is staggering because we're taking this. So again, what am I missing here? You know, we're talking, you know, a $20 to $30 billion impact on healthcare by this excess of men diagnosed with prostate cancer. And then you look, the government said, listen, well, maybe there's some studies that we're missing here. So they looked at 63 studies with more than 500 people in a randomized fashion with multivitamins in heart disease and cancer. None of them showed a benefit. 0 showed a benefit. So I've just showed you a number of studies with clear negatives, and yet none has yet shown a benefit. In 2004, they looked and they said people who smoked or former smokers, we got to give them high-dose antioxidants to prevent lung cancer because they're dying like in droves of lung cancer. And 28% higher lung cancer when they took these supplements. 17% higher death rate when they took these supplements. So again, pills, I'm not sure they actually add benefit. And clearly they're causing harm. So the other side of the equation is looking at how technology is going to fit in. Because clearly there probably are some people that benefit from taking pills. Right? If you're pregnant, you need to take prenatal vitamins. There's certain eye conditions where vitamins have been shown to help. Maybe some people with their diet need it, but we need technology to start to say who needs what, because blanket statements like I'm making probably aren't the best thing going forward. Well, in 1976, if you thought you were pregnant or your spouse thought she was pregnant, you took a tube of blood, you went to a hospital, because it couldn't be done anywhere but a hospital. Every hospital in the country had a rabbit floor. We took that blood, we injected it into a poor rabbit. 5 days later, we sacrificed the rabbit, and we looked at the rabbit's ovaries. If they were enlarged, you were pregnant. That was the state of the art in 1976. Well, 1977, the first proteomic test was approved by the FDA. It was a $10 urine-based test for pregnancy. Rabbits over the world rejoiced. And all of a sudden, we had a binary outcome, yes, no, whether you're pregnant or not. And it radically changed reproductive health, women's health, you know, child mortality, because we can actually give prenatal vitamins. We can take care of women because we knew they were pregnant. Changed everything. We need more technologies like this. And we now have the capacity with newer technology to actually bring them in. And this is the proteomics. This is the cover of the book. This is that 20,000-foot view of the state of the system. Where instead of, in our country, we do colonoscopy at age 50, right? Because that's where the risk rewards come together, and that's where it's cost effective. I love that word. It's cost effective to do. Well, what do you say to the 4,000 people in the United States last year who died of colon cancer under the age of 40? You weren't cost effective? What do you say to the fact that only 17% of people who should have colonoscopy do at age 50? Well, what if we had a blood test to say who had a colonic polyp? So first of all, we would do it in the right people. We'd have almost 100% compliance. And the other is, we have a quality metric. Did that doc get the polyp out or not? Because right now there is no quality metric. That's what technology can do, is start to personalize things. And we're not far away from that. There's a newer technology coming out that's pretty wild. Turns out you and I have 10-fold more bacteria in us than we do cells in our body. So if someone in China, you look at the incidence of prostate cancer and breast cancer, it's 1/10 what ours is. After they move to the United States after a decade, it starts to approach ours. Well, we said it's the Burger King and the McDonald's. It turns out it's not the case. It's the bacteria in the water. It's our microbiome. They get populated with our bacteria. Well, those bacteria, they control how you metabolize your food. They control your hormone levels. And for the first time ever this year, we've learned to quantitate them and actually look at what type are populating what individual. I guarantee you over the next several years, we're going to start to modulate them to reduce risk for disease, which will be powerful. So I'm a believer in prevention. I look at the data. There are little things one can do that can radically affect health. The Framingham Heart Study, one of the most protective effects wasn't what you ate. It wasn't your weight. It was actually owning a dog. And so we look at the data, we first say, well, a dog, well, it relaxes you. Well, it's not that it relaxes you, it puts you on a regular schedule. So if you start to look at the data on regularity, it is profound for health. If you have your lunch today at noon, and then tomorrow at 2 o'clock, for 2 hours, stress hormones go up. When stress hormones go up, the body goes in a protective mode. It says, hey, listen, there might be a lion coming. I got to really save energy, so I got to shut down. So you get about a 25 to 30% decrease in cognition. You get about a 36% decrease in exercise performance, and you actually gain weight because you lower metabolism dramatically to try to save energy. So if you eat on a regular schedule, sleep on a regular schedule, dramatic effect on health. It's the person who randomly goes by places like this and grabs an apple that hurt themselves. If you have an apple every day at 3 o'clock, greatest thing in the world. So regularity is key. Almost as important as what you eat. Very powerful, costs nothing, and can have a dramatic effect on health. And so I'm happy to stop here, answer questions. I know we've kind of went through a lot and went all over the place, but all the data is in the book. I mean, we're proud of it. It's aggressive, and I'd love to get comments back from you. Email me, tell me what you think. But again, questions, we're happy to talk. I appreciate it. Yes?
Thanks for coming to talk.
Thank
Is this
you.
on? Yeah. I guess I'm curious about what you would say about the way people interact with their doctors. And at the start of your talk, you mentioned that in China, they're going to implement some of the stuff as law. In the United States, it's going to be much more decentralized and debated. And I can go to a doctor who graduated medical school 20 years ago or 40 years ago or 5 years ago, and they'll probably have very different reactions.
Right.
But you advised us to not even take an aspirin a day without going to that doctor.
I want that discussion to happen. You're right. And so, one of the things we put early in the book, and you can download, is a 4-page questionnaire I want you to fill out before you go to your doctor. There's this old adage that obviously you hear know well, which is enough data, error goes away. When you go to your doctor, they check your blood pressure at 1 o'clock. Well, whoever checked it in the morning when you get up, at night when you go to bed, when you're pissed off after a phone call, I want a lot of data. I want you to look at your own metrics. So you go in with all your data. But if your doctor's not going to listen, go to a different doctor. It's a free market system. The only way we're going to change it is from the ground up. And I wrote this book so each of us can be in charge and go in with that data. And go in and say, listen, the studies show this. I fit that study. What do you think? And start to have a real discussion. So you can go in with everything written down in this questionnaire before you go in. So that 5 minutes, if you're lucky, 10 minutes with your doctor, you can actually use it correctly. But you're right, we have to change the doctors. We are incentivized, and I'm guilty as anybody else, for treatment. We're not incentivized for prevention. And we need to change that in our country. The average time on a health plan is 4.5 years. So your health plan doesn't care preventing your heart disease. It's not going to happen for 10 years, then I'll be in somebody else's plan. We have to change that way of thinking, and we're going to do it from the ground up. Thank you.
One of the fascinating and compelling points I think you made was that we should look at the proteome and look for ways to modify your biochemistry to conform to that template.
Yes.
I assume that's a good starting point, but do you think there's going to be a need to look at it as a dynamic system where the template will adapt over age or time or environmental conditions, and how do we figure out the right template for a person?
With enough data. I mean, the thing is that, I'd love there one day where you go to your doctor, it pricks your finger, goes into some technology that profiles it, and you're populating the data set as well as getting something back from it. So just akin to my search on Google is better today than it was yesterday, I want medicine to improve on a daily basis, and we're not. We don't have common data elements. It's shocking. Right? You call it a broken leg, I call it a fraction leg. Nobody has standardized data elements and nomenclature in my field yet. It is absolutely from the 1920s, and we need to change that. The technology is here. We got to use it right and build in the standards to allow it to actually grow. Yeah.
I recently saw the documentary about Stanislaw Brzezinski.
Yeah.
And it seemed like a really interesting documentary. I looked online to get more information, and it seemed like the government and the entire medical community was like, they thought this guy was a quack.
So you really think there's a conspiracy? This is a guy in Texas who now has moved to Mexico who has a drug that he developed called anti-neoplastin, and he charges cash $60,000 to give it to you. And he argues there's a conspiracy. So what he does is he went to all the cancer meetings, he stands up in the audience, and he goes to some random meeting, and he stands up and starts talking about it. Everyone's like, sit down, be quiet, because it's interrupting whoever's talking about something else. And he films it and shows these videos that the community is against me. Against him because he's interrupting somebody else speaking. And there have been 4 randomized studies done with this, causing increased death, shorter lifespan than not. And he's out there saying, well, there's a conspiracy. The government and doctors want to hide it because we're going to take away their business if I cure all disease. What am I missing here?
He doesn't seem trustworthy, which is why I didn't totally,
there were 4 randomized trials showing it didn't work.
Right.
It made people live shorter.
I was just more curious about, I'm more interested in experimentation because
Right.
bodies are different. What might work for you might not work for me, and vice versa. So I'm wondering if you feel like there's something within the system that just doesn't allow as much experimentation as there could be.
So that's a great point. Is, by definition with advanced cancer, you want to be on a clinical trial because standard therapy doesn't work, right? So you want to experiment and do new things. We are very much risk averse in our world, and the capital markets have been closed to biotechnology for the last 15 years. There are very few, if any, biotech companies. Pharmaceutical companies are bonds. They want to return 5% a year. They're not taking risk in doing their clinical trials. One of the arguments in the book is I think we have enough drugs out there. We just got to learn how to use them, and we're not. So I agree with you. We need to take more experiments. Cancer patients especially are willing to take any risk in the world because they've got no choice. And yet, most of the time, we don't do that. It's public that I was one of Steve Jobs' doctors. And, he puts in his book how, we sequenced his genome. We didn't sequence his genome. We sequenced a couple of genes. We looked at it, and everything we did was part of clinical trials. He went on drugs, and so did everybody else there. I'm a believer in trials. I'm a believer in doing randomized clinical trials or clinical trials that are single-arm to see if these drugs work. And many of them do. I chair one of the brain cancer foundations, and about 7 or 8 years ago, I got a call from a doctor in Galveston, Texas, who said, I gave this drug called Avastin, a Genentech drug, to a patient with glioblastoma, and it worked. I go, there's no way. It's too big to even get across the blood-brain barrier. This story's in the book. And she said, well, here are the scans. They look real. So we did a trial on people who failed chemos. They have weeks to live. And at 6 months, nobody progressed. And so this drug that didn't even cross the blood-brain barrier worked because it bound a protein and lowered the pressure of the cancer. When you lower the pressure, the cancer stops growing. A year later, it's FDA approved in standard treatment for brain cancer. So we need to keep our eyes open and learn from every experience, be they with somebody who's a little questionable or not. But right now, all we do is we have to report the negatives to the FDA. I have to report a side effect to the FDA. I have a good response, a cure, I never have to report it. Nobody knows about it, it's hidden. So we need to change that. We need to get data out there. We need to talk about our experiences and learn from them, because we're not now. Yeah.
So I really like a lot of the examples you're giving about
Yes.
the different kinds of inflammation that can occur from sitting, or
Yeah.
obviously like not eating at the same time every day. What I'm really curious about is there some kind of centralized source where you know the risk factors of various types of inflammation? Because I think this is kind of the missing element.
You are 100% right. We have a poor man's metric now, which is called high sensitivity C-reactive protein. But we need to get better metrics for measuring different kinds of inflammation, optimizing whether it be the shoes you wear.
Right.
Your feet hurt at the end of the day, that's inflammation. I want to optimize. I want to have a marker to say there's less inflammation or more. This is where we need to put the research focus, where technology needs to go, and it's not right now. But you're right.
And what, like, for example, like relative to other factors, not eating at the same time every day.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, so it's great that, I mean, that sort of yields an insight that I guess there's other types of inflammation that we're not aware of, but like that inflammation in particular, how does that?
Well, that's not inflammation as much as stress hormones, the eating at the same time.
Stress,
But yes.
right.
But yeah, I mean, we can't quantitate that for individual. We can only quantitate it for the collective group. And what you're getting at is that we want to start to do it for your individual and say, for you, it's better to do X, Y, or Z. And that's what I hope technology will be able to yield. You know, right now, the only mature technology we have is genetics. The others are immature. But genetics, I mean, it's akin to standing outside 2 Chinese restaurants and looking at the ingredient list. They're exactly the same. You taste the food, one could be awesome, one could be horrible. So genetics is your ingredient list. What's going on that moment in time, that's whether it be the metabolomics or the microbiomics or the proteomics, that's the next generation.
So you mentioned about not taking the flu shots or other
Yes.
things and so on. So that actually surprised me. What you're saying is if you get flu, that has negative consequences later 10
In
years
life,
down the
yes.
road. Which is opposite to what you hear is, okay, you're not getting sick enough. You know, generally we basically have very good compared to you live in other countries where you get sick more often, and generally your body has more immune built up, and essentially it doesn't have you have less autoimmune diseases because your body is not fighting any diseases.
I guess I'm missing the point.
So,
Third hypothesis is you're better off having been exposed to.
Well, you are being exposed. The vaccine exposes you, but it's less inflammation.
but the inflammation part, does it essentially you're saying it lasts longer? So can you elaborate more on if you became sick now?
So, well,
what are the downsides of that?
I think of it very simply. If I gave you a vaccine, you're going to make your arm hurts. You're making an inflammatory response. You're making antibodies against whatever pathogen is in there. And again, if you're lucky and it was that flu strain, you're not going to get sick that year. If it's a different flu strain, your flu is going to be less because you have cross-reactive antibodies. But you get the flu, it's a staggering inflammatory storm. You feel it, right? You can barely move for days. That inflammatory storm, your body shuts down things like DNA repair and others to shunt its energy to fight off that viral infection. And bad things can happen down the road. Yes, I think it's a good thing to be exposed to, as a child, we're exposed to multiple different, this dirt there are multiple different pathogens, and we develop immune responses over time. But vaccines are good. Vaccines expose you to these in an environment where you don't get as much of this profound inflammation.
But isn't it like yearly vaccine at an age when you are basically fit, not such a good thing? I can understand like very early or...
No, I mean, again, the immune response and the small immune response you make to a vaccine compared to 7 days of having an influenza, I mean, it's a dramatic effect. I mean, at least the data show that.
What you mentioned about the rabbit study, didn't the rabbit die when you actually inject with the human blood?
No, I mean, it was plasma. It wasn't blood cells. So it's just the plasma. Yes. The rabbit died when you cut off his, or her head, yes.
So I saw it on the Daily Show, so my question might be in the book, but a lot of your presentation was very much kind of like a blanket against vitamins.
Yes.
And vitamins or external supplements kind of in that nature.
Mm-hmm.
Are in any age group or areas, do you kind of have exceptions for that, or
Sure.
your general philosophy?
I mean, pregnant women, I think, should be on vitamins, and we know that it helps for prenatal health. Again, I'm not blanket against vitamins. It's more as an example. I want you to question everything you put in your body and say, why am I doing this? Is there data that I should be taking this pill? I pray that one vitamin works. I'm not against them. I just pray they work. Everybody in the world juices now. Once you put a vegetable or fruit into a blender, it's all degraded within hundredths of a millisecond. So James Lind, captain of the British Royal Navy, amazing guy. He won the Battle of Trafalgar. He beat the French because he had limes on his ship, because his troops didn't get scurvy and the French did. Like any good entrepreneur at the end, he said, and I happened to sell the extract of limes, and he sold the lime juice. It didn't work. It didn't cure scurvy. Why? As soon as you squeeze that lime, everything's degraded. I just want you to ask the question, everything you do, why am I doing it for me?
Then when you talk very positively about statins, is that something at a certain age group or
So if you look at the data, you know, people with average risk factors, they start around 40 showing a benefit. People with higher risk factors, if they start in 20, there's more of a benefit. So it really depends on if you know, everyone in your family had heart attacks in their 40s, you want to start earlier. If you've got no history of heart disease or cancer in your family, maybe you don't want to do it at all. And so I really want that discussion to happen with your doctor based on you. But I think the discussion should happen now. I mean, for all of us in our 20s, our 30s, our 40s, and keep having it.